Hello, thank you everybody. It's brilliant to have you all here. We had over 200 school leaders register in the end. So my name's Anna Cole and I'll be your chair for this evening. Thank you for taking the time out today. We know it's such a stressful and difficult time for you, and we also thank you for More Than a Score as campaigners, but also as parents for all that you do. So I'm going to outline the format for the call. This call will last an hour, so we'll finish at 6. For the first half, we'll hear short speeches from a panel of speakers. So we're absolutely delighted that we can welcome Kate Green MP, Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Daisy Cooper MB, the new Liberal Democrat education spokesperson, and Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer. We'll also be hearing from 4 primary head teachers, a child and adolescent psychotherapist, and from More Than a Score about next steps and strategy at the end. So time is really tight, and we've asked the panel to keep their speeches very short, 3 minutes or less, please. And we should have about 20 minutes for questions. And then finally, one of our supporting head teachers will sum up, and we'll finish again by outlining the strategy and next steps for the campaign. So I'm going to tell you about the practicalities of the call. I hope all the tech works for this. The call's set up as a webinar, so none of the participants will have their microphone or camera on, and only the panelists, when they're speaking, you'll see them on the screen, or me when I'm speaking. So all the participant interaction will be through the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom. So there's a toolbar at the bottom of your screens, and at the bottom of the screen, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, on another device, it could be at the bottom or the top of your screen. And for some devices, it may have a menu button or a more button. There's 3 little dots, and you can touch that to access the toolbar. So we're going to be using chat for giving you information, sharing links or information. And you can share information. We'll be sharing information with you through the chat. But really importantly is the questions. We want the questions to go through the Q&A box, so the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen on the toolbar. When asking a question, please include your name, and we'll try and group questions together and try to get through as many as possible in the time that we have. So we're putting the running order, practicalities for the call, in the chat as well, and NEU are hosting this call. So we'll sharing their behaviour statement as well. And I'd like to thank our brilliant tech team too. We've got Mike, Henry, Sally, Lucy and Amy from the NEU who are doing all the tech for this call. And finally, I need to read out a short data protection statement. So we are recording this session for those unable to attend, as this is a webinar setup. Participants will not be seen or heard on the recording, but the chat and questions will be recorded. If you do not wish to be part of the recording in any way, then please do not call in on this occasion. Now, I'm absolutely delighted now to welcome Jonathan Cooper, who's a head teacher in Brighton, one of our core supporters, and he's going to kick off with the first short speech, please, Jonathan, on how heads can work together.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much, More Than a Score, for organising this very important webinar and for spearheading this campaign. It's great to have this support, because over the last sort of 10 years, 15 years, head teachers really have lost their voice in the educational agenda. Whether that's the new curriculum or tests or the new Ofsted framework, really there's been very, very little consultation, and we have been really very disempowered. And now with the announcement that the government still wants to maintain standardised tests over this coming year, we're finding ourselves in another terrible situation. I mean, standardised tests in a world in which we are now facing massive upheaval in terms of massive uncertainty and changes in schools on a day-by-day basis. There is no standard week in a school, day in a school, hour in a school at the moment. So the idea of having a single measure at the end of this year to measure the performance of schools is illogical and inequitable as well as putting a huge amount of pressure on schools. So it's brilliant that we've got, and there's about 200 head teachers here listening today. That is an amazing start for this campaign. When about a year and a half ago, I worked on a campaign against the budget cuts within Brighton. We started off with a small group of heads, worked with SOS, Save Our Schools as well, a great campaigning organisation. And very soon, through networking, through the use of our clusters, we began to spread the voice and get more and more people engaged, more and more people involved in the discussion, and more people campaigning very, very quickly. Then we got the unions behind us as well, local executives, to put pressure on national executive as well. So we felt that we were supported. It was very important that we felt supported throughout this process, because we were putting our necks above the parapet in some respects. After that, we really reached out to parents to make them involved in this discussion. Parent voice is just so powerful, and that again really supported head teachers in feeling confident that they could move forwards with the campaign, and actually really helped us get the governing body on our sides as well. So with the parents, with the governing body, we felt confident at that point that we could move forward. With 200 head teachers here listening to this webinar today, that's a really powerful force that if we could begin to start networking straight away after this particular webinar. It's a pivotal moment, isn't it? It's a real pivotal moment. I think we can make a big difference very quickly if we are a unified voice. So thank you again to More Than a Score for all that you're doing, and thank you very much for everybody else for attending today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. And you kept within time. Brilliant. We're off to a good start. I'd now like to, is Kate Green on the call? Yeah, Kate Green MP, because I'd like to now introduce her Shadow Secretary of State for Education. If she's on the call, if not, she may come in late and then we can move on. Right, so she's not here yet. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to introduce Michelle Sheehy, who's a head teacher in Walsall, and she's also on the NEHT National Executive. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, thanks Anna, thanks More Than a Score for having me here. Although I'm on the National Executive of the NEHT, I'm speaking here for myself as a head teacher. I want SATs to be cancelled next year, but it's not NEHT policy yet. I'm hoping that it will become policy after our national conference, and that's why I'm presenting a motion to conference on this in October. As a head teacher for a primary school and previously of a junior school as well, I have felt for some considerable time that SATs are a negative influence on the development of children. Last year, we had a child who was very anxious about his approaching SATs and became disruptive as a result. He was very intelligent. I knew he would do well. I was aware that Ofsted was approaching and we needed to rely on his extra 3% expected attainment. He did complete the test, but only after becoming extremely distressed. He asked me why I was making him do the test, and I gave the stock reply that it was for his benefit and that he would be disadvantaged if he didn't do them. He replied that what I was saying was untrue and that we made them do SATs to make the school look good. I had no answer to that because that's exactly how I really felt myself. So after that, I vowed that I would disapply any child who became anxious about doing the test, regardless of the effect it would have on our school's data. Whether I was brave enough to do that or not wasn't tested because this year the SATs didn't take place. In normal conditions, so before the pandemic, I believe that SATs were detrimental to the well-being of children. And because of this, I intended to present a motion at conference asking if teacher assessment could be accepted and included on published data for children who had a diagnosis of a mental health condition already. I had discussed that at an NHT regional meeting and got consensus there. But then COVID happened and I thought that the motion that I was presenting didn't go far enough. So in these times where there is, a palpable level of anxiety due to the measures that we have to take to combat the virus, we just need to ensure that all avoidable stresses are kept to a minimum. Children need far more pastoral care and support than usual. We need to increase the lesson time that we spend on PSHE, and I think that the time that we spend preparing children for tests is just time wasted. I think that now we've got a chance to rethink our education system and make it more effective for our children. They haven't taken SATs this year. If they're made to take them next year, they'll be an inaccurate measure anyway, as they will have missed the equivalent of a term's teaching. And in addition to that, different schools will have had different experiences in terms of school closures and so on. So that would be extremely unfair if they were to compare results from different schools. I just think that now, as school leaders, we need to make our voices heard. And I honestly feel that if we don't, then we're complicit in a system that we know is harmful to our children's education.
Thank you, Michelle. Really important there. So Kate Green is now here. So I'm really pleased to welcome Kate Green, Shadow Secretary of State for Education.
Hello, hi. Yes, sorry, I'm having a few technical nightmares, so I hope I'm staying for a while, although with apologies, I will need to leave at around 5:30 for a further fringe. Unlike, it's just like a real conference, this. I go to too many things all at once in different places, somehow believing that party conferences defy all known science, and they don't, even online. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I am very keen to hear what people have to say. I think there are two questions that are going on simultaneously. One is SATs this year. One is the longer term question of what is the right form of assessment for the future, because it's very clear that the system we have got has given rise to many, many concerns, some of which Michelle was expressing quite correctly a few moments ago. They apply in some ways more acutely this year, but I think there are underlying concerns, serious underlying concerns about the system we've got that have to be addressed. And I think we've got to think both in terms of this year and in terms of the more longer term reform around the sort of principles that I would say are about a system that obviously has to be rigorous. We do want to know what difference education is making, whether we're doing the right things for our children, and whether we're giving them the learning experience that enriches their childhoods and prepares them for their future lives. But we also need to make sure that it's relevant, that we're actually looking at the right things, assessing the right inputs, and judging the right outcomes that we're looking for. And we need to be doing that in the right way and at the right time. And I think we've got to be worried, thirdly, when I look at a system that needs to be robust, that it's a system that is not creating unlooked for, unwelcome, unneeded stress and concern among children, among teachers, among parents and families. A system that feels so unfair and so troubling to so many of the players in it, I think is a system that has some really deep-rooted, gives rise to some very deep-rooted concerns, which absolutely need to be addressed. The final thing I really just want to say, because I did very much want to come and listen to as many contributions as I could before I have to go again, was that what we need in schools very, very quickly is certainty. Teachers are in an impossible position just now. They don't know what they're planning for. They don't know what they're teaching to. They can't plan the rest of the academic year. Some of that uncertainty is, of course, because of the really terrifying way in which the virus already seems to be spiraling back out of control and the measures that might need to be taken to address that, and how that might bear on children's learning. But some of it is frankly because the government has been useless. It has been late with guidance and information. When it's issued it, it's been contradictory and confusing, and it hasn't been prepared in dialogue with the people at the front line, the teachers and staff who are working in the system with children and young people every day. So I know the government has said they're going to give some more information in October. That strikes me as rather late. They've known schools were going to start again at the beginning of September. 4 months. Why have they not already come with absolute clarity for teachers and for parents so that everyone knows where they are? So, you know, it's a great pleasure to be with everybody. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation that I can continue to have with you as we look at not just what's happening in this year of extreme events, but much more importantly in some ways into the longer term future, because we cannot go on with a system which so obviously rightly has lost the faith and confidence, if indeed it ever had it, of the main players within it, teachers, parents and the children who are so directly affected.
Thank you, thank you. I think I would certainly agree with a lot of that, all of that really, and certainty for planning now. Schools, we know that schools really need this decision about what's happening this year to come really soon, rather than waiting until the last minute, so like so much has. So thank you so much for coming, Kate. And we certainly want to work with you, and we'll be talking about strategy and next steps afterwards. I'm now going to introduce Daisy Cooper, MP, who's the Lib Dem education spokesperson. So Daisy. Oh, I'm just please do use the Q&A function on Zoom. So there's some great comments coming through, but we also want some questions. We want this to be a really interactive, rich dialogue. We're all here together now, so please use the Q&A function. You don't have to put your name if you don't want to, but just put some questions in so that we can put some questions to our panel. Sorry, Daisy.
Hi, well, thank you very much for having me. I mean, let's cut to the chase. I mean, even before the pandemic, we knew that teaching to the test and having exams at every single step of the way was demoralising and outdated and just not a very effective way measuring children's attainment or their potential. So we know that this is a problem anyway, and coronavirus has thrown it into sharp relief. These exams don't give teachers the freedom to teach, and they don't give children the freedom to learn. And so they're very damaging. But it's not just that. So we know that the reception baseline assessments the government wanted to introduce would be a step in the wrong direction. Liberal Democrats have called for those to be scrapped. We believe that SATs should be scrapped as well and should be replaced with the teacher moderated assessment. I know from head teachers in my constituency that this year has brought untold disruption, and the issues they're raising with me, as I'm sure you will know, things like not even having enough physical space in the school in some places, being able to deal with the mental health challenges facing some of their students, trying to balance the books and trying to even afford the extra additional cleaning costs. There are so many day-to-day problems in terms of just making schools function. The idea that we should be preparing for these exams as well is absolutely crazy. But we know in particular there are children who don't perform well in exams, particularly children with special educational needs. And that's a really important element of this debate, I think. Kate talked about the importance of certainty, and we definitely do need certainty from the government. But I think actually what we need are scenarios, because we don't know where we're going to be this time next year, but we do need to see some scenario planning to say in different circumstances, these are what the paths might be. And I'd really welcome sort of feedback and ideas about, what kind of thing people would like to see the government saying right now on that issue. The last thing I would say is, yes, we need to reform. We need to drop SATs, we need to reform exams so we have better teacher moderated assessments, but we need to be looking at league tables as well. They just don't measure all the things that are actually valuable, and I think we need a broader set of indicators that have information about well-being and other kind of goals that can sit alongside academic attainment. So I think one of the very small silver linings of this pandemic is that it has opened up the debate on this question of the importance of teacher moderated assessments. So we need to sort of keep pushing at that door and try and extend the conversation, not just to what happens next year, but how we actually trust teachers and give them the freedom to teach.
Thank you. I think we'll all agree with that. Oh, I'm muted. Am I muted? No.
Nope, you're good.
Sorry, the thing came up. Thank you so much, Daisy. I think that's given us really rich stuff for conversation. Please put your questions in the Q&A box so that we can have some questions after this. I'm seeing lots of stuff coming up in the chat, which is brilliant. I'm now going to hand over to Brian Walton, who's a head teacher in Somerset, and he's also a member of the Worth Less campaign. Brian. Is Brian there?
Brian is unmuted, but his mic is not working.
Right. Okay. So should we go over to Natalie Bennett? Is Natalie Bennett here?
She's just coming in now.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll hand over to Natalie Bennett, who's the second Green peer in the House of Lords, going to talk about a view from the Lords.
Mute open. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me along here today. And I just want to reflect for a second on that really powerful testimony we heard from Michelle earlier about the negative influence of SATs and the time spent preparing for the test is time wasted. And that really reminded me actually of a couple of years ago. I was talking to a head teacher in North Yorkshire as the government was talking about introducing baseline tests. And I think she surprised herself, but also really educated me when she started talking about how fearful she was about the damage they do, and actually found herself virtually bursting into tears at the thought of the damage. And that's what our education system, what our system is forcing teachers who care very deeply, head teachers who care very deeply, into just impossible situations. Now, I've always been pleased to back more than a score. Green Party policy has long been to abolish the baseline tests, abolish stats, abolish Ofsted, restore the continuous assessment at GCSEs and A-level. We all know that Finland, everyone says, gosh, isn't Finland wonderful as a model of teaching, and then goes the opposite direction. But I think the arguments now are just utterly overwhelming in the age of COVID-19. Again, quoting Michelle saying, all stresses need to be kept to a minimum. There's so many pressures on our young people and our students. And if we think about, we are not a healthy society now in all kinds of ways. Students are stressed by the poverty and inequality, the inadequate housing they face at home. They're terribly concerned. I meet lots of young climate strikers, even primary age climate strikers, who are really concerned about the climate emergency and the nature crisis. We have a real mental health crisis, and then we've piled on top of that COVID. And the last thing we need, particularly next year, is the stress of exams. I can kind of feel like I can say this as an individual, because I used to be really good at exams. I'm not proud about that, because it meant that I actually got good marks in lots of subjects that I knew almost nothing about, because all I did was pass the exam. And I think it's crucial for the future of the mental health of our children, for the future health of our society, for the actual education of our children, that we free teachers from teaching to the test, allow them to care for and educate their pupils, and prepare them for the really difficult world that they're going out into. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. So that's the end of our speeches. We've got one head teacher to speak at the end, and we're also going to, More Than a Score is going to, Alison Ali from More Than a Score will speak at the end. So there's loads of rich stuff there really to discuss, and we're going to open up to the panel. Sadly, Brian Walton his microphone's not working, his device broke today, so he's going to post what he was going to say into the chat, so that's recorded, so thank you for that. And so I'm going to open up now to the panel some questions, and the first question I've got is from Hildy Mitchell. Many parents are concerned about their child not doing well at SATs, as if this will determine their lifelong outcomes. They don't all understand that the accountability measures on schools, and some even employ tutors, etc. How can we help parents understand what these are about so that they can support the movement? That's a brilliant question. I'm going to go first to Jonathan.
Am I?
We can hear you.
You can hear me, can you? Yeah, thank you. To be honest, Hildy, it's at the moment, I think for me, the most important thing is to actually make the government recognise that there isn't that we do not need these tests this year. That it is totally wrong to be thinking that it is a logical step to bring in the tests this year. I think we need to make parents recognise that as well, because I think they feel we do have to do them for some reason. And it's easy just to get out there to inform parents of the reality that we face. The reality that we face is we are desperately coping with very, very difficult situation. We do not need this in addition to everything else that we're coping with. And actually what it is doing is taking us away from the most important thing, which is caring for our children. Parents understand that. They recognise that schools really want the best for their children. We just need to make sure, I think, Hildy, you arrange meetings with parents like we did with the budget cuts. You make it clear our position in terms of saying, this is what's important at the school at this moment. This is what we're working hard towards. We do not want this to take our minds off of what our essential purpose is. It's a moral purpose. We have to make sure we are caring for our children, our families, and our communities at the moment. This is not caring for our families and communities.
Thank you. I've just realised that Claire Hopkins, who's our child and adolescent psychologist, was going to speak, and I went straight to questions, but actually I think that's quite a good time to bring you in. We're talking about mental health. So can I bring in Claire Hopkins to do her speech, and then we'll go back to the questions.
She's dropped off the call. She's just come in this second. Hold on.
Sorry about that. While we're waiting, does anyone else want to speak up to the parent point? Kate? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wonder if there's some work to be done with our secondary colleagues in terms of when they're doing their, I know probably most of them aren't going to do prospective parent live events, but if they're communicating with our Year 6 parents to say to them, look, SATs won't matter. They don't do SATs, it won't matter to us. Because a lot of the time, I think, certainly for my parents, they feel that SATs is a stepping stone to secondary. And if they don't do the SATs, it might affect their secondary education. If our secondary colleagues can say, it won't matter a jot, we've got it sorted, I think that will help the parents to understand that it's not as important as they think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And also, Alison, do you want to speak about the work that More Than a Score doing with parents? Oh, maybe should we have? Let's bring Claire in, and then we can bring back the parent point if we want to. Let's bring in Claire now. She's child and adolescent psychotherapist in Leeds.
Hi everybody, thanks for the invite. The sad fact is that before COVID, 1 in 5 of us were struggling with a mental health difficulty. And recent research published by The Lancet suggests that now, post-lockdown, that's gone to 1 in 4. And that children and young people have been disproportionately affected. Public Health England, for example, states that 2/3 of children aged between 8 and 24 are reporting more often feelings of being sad, loneliness and despair. And I guess the question we've got to ask ourselves is why? And in my experience of working with children and families, I guess there are 3 things which I think lead to a deterioration in mental health. 1, when stress is overwhelming, 2, when it's enduring, and 3, when there's not enough of a kind of adult, attuned and available mind for children to help them process those difficulties. And sadly, COVID creates this perfect storm of all 3. It's overwhelming by its nature because it's a real threat to survival. Luckily, less so for children, but absolutely for their parents and carers, on which the children heavily rely on. 2, and I think we'll all agree, it's incredibly enduring, and there's no pockets of space so that children can rest and recuperate and rebuild that resiliency. And 3rd, and I guess probably the most concerning, is the impact that it's having on adult mental health. The well-known charity Mind published some survey results recently stating that 2/3 of adults who had pre-existing mental health difficulties are now significantly struggling through lockdown. And more worryingly is that 1 in 4 adults who didn't have a pre-existing mental health difficulty are now rating themselves as having poor or very poor mental health. So that the problem is this would naturally compromise an adult's mind, and that it will not have as much time and attention to give to children. And sometimes that relies then on children relying on their own coping mechanisms, which can sometimes be undeveloped or unhealthy, and that's where mental health difficulties arise. So what's all this got to do with SATs? I guess we can say with some certainty that children's mental health is going to be really fragile in this time, and schools have this amazing opportunity because of their structure and the routine and the availability of a really good adult's mind in order to smooth children's mental health. And SAT adds to stress. It certainly doesn't take any of it away. And SATs are stressful. They're stressful for children because of a fear of the unknown, but also a massive fear of failure. So with all of this evidence to bear in mind, can we really balance the proposed benefits of SATs with the increased risk to children's mental health? Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Sorry for missing you and going straight to the questions. I can now see all the panel. I had them in a small bit, so I now can see everyone. That's great. So should we move on to another question, unless anyone's got something they really wanted to talk about the parent point? No. Anyone? Did you want to?
I was just very briefly going to say that in research that we did during lockdown with parents, more than 3/4 of parents felt that taking SATs would add to the stress of their children in this coming year, that only 8% of parents consider preparing for SATs important this year, and that only 1 in 10 parents were bothered that their children missed SATs last year. So that gives us that was a YouGov poll, and that gives a very strong indication of how, when parents do understand what SATs are about and that they're about accountability, and that they are just using children as an accountability measure, any parental support for it really falls away. And at More Than a Score, we take our mission to raise awareness of this amongst parents very seriously. We have very strong social media and and just general awareness raising campaigns around exactly how statutory tests work.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Kate Green, you're having to leave. Thank you so much for coming and being part of the call. Daisy, did you want to say something very quickly?
Yeah, just to say, as a constituency MP, it's clear that parents don't speak with one voice. So some parents have been sort of very relaxed over the last few months, and have been incredibly anxious. And I'm sure many of you as teachers will have seen that. The message that's coming through to me loud and clear from parents in particular is their anxiety around the difference between schools and the different levels of teaching that schools have been able to provide during lockdown. And I think that my hunch is that parents will be very receptive to a message of more teaching and less testing. And I think that's what they want. They want their children to receive teaching. They want their children to have more face-to-face time with their teachers. They want to know that they'll be assessed somehow. But I don't see any kind of sort of I've never had any parents come to me and say that they particularly want SATs tests. I mean, they don't care how it's done, actually. I think teachers care about how it's done because that matters, but parents want to know that there's some kind of assessment, but they want the teaching to be there, and that's far more important.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Should we move on? Let's move on to another question. This is quite a difficult question. It's going to go to the heads, I think, particularly. From James Barry, as a leader of a school, judged RI, how do we ensure that we're not going to be penalised at our next inspection if we boycott SATs, etc.? Well, we're not asking for a boycott, so this is not what we're asking. But it says here we may want to do this, but the pressure hanging over us. So I think just making it really clear here, More Than a Score is what we're trying to do at the moment is put pressure on the government to stop the tests, to drop them for this year for all the reasons, and then have a longer conversation with the profession about what we do in the future, as all our speakers have said really, and it's been said in the chat. But I think there has to be an acknowledgement that if your school is in a category, or it's much more difficult for you to stand out, and I see this all the time, heads very isolated as well. So I don't know if there's any of the heads want to speak to that at all.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay. I know that this perhaps isn't much reassurance, but we had an Ofsted inspection last October, and the inspector did not look at the results at all. She didn't refer to them. They were okay, they were brilliant, but she just didn't take them into account. I don't know if that helps at all, but I do think that that's the way it seems to be going.
Yeah, and I think this is what we're trying to do today. We've got 200 of you registered here, and we want to build this. We want to build this movement so that you go in numbers and you speak in numbers, and there I think will be the strength in heads. So that's really what we're all about, and we really want to work with you on this so that you're not isolated speaking on your own. I'll go to a next question. I think this is from Tamsin Beer. Are the SATs results even useful for secondary schools? Many of them do CAT tests in the first term anyway. I've definitely heard that. Who would like to speak to that?
I can come back on it if you like, Anna.
Yeah, come on. Okay.
I think again, it comes back to the point I was making earlier. It's exactly the same point almost, is that if the secondary schools can help us by communicating how useless the SATs are for them, then hopefully parents will then start to understand that actually it's not the be all and end all. It's about us, it's about school, it's not about the children. And if the children don't need those tests to go forward to secondary because they'll have their own systems and their own ways of doing it. It's a bit like you get those year 6 children and the parents who are right on board with you until the last minute, and it's like, who are you now at secondary school? It's the same thing. Leave SATs behind at primary. Secondary need to help us by saying, this is how we do it, this is our system. We don't need the SATs, nor do you.
So again, it's working. We need to work with parents, which is what More Than Score are doing. We're also looking to build our base with secondary leaders as well. Yeah. Anyone got anything to add on that? Jonathan?
I just think also it's an opportunity. We need to take this opportunity to develop our own. We've got our assessment systems already in place within schools, which give us fantastic information about all the children, and to show the worth of that, because it is dismissed continually by many within the profession sometimes as well, but also by politicians as well. But this is a time to say, well, we're not just getting rid of SATs. We're actually saying we have got much better information from these children, which will support them much more effectively in their education.
So this really fits with the next question I've got here from Jim Nicholson. For many years, the testing regime has been outdated and poorly constructed. However, there needs to be an alternative developed clearly so others can understand that there is a better way. Does anyone have a clear alternative mapped out as yet to convince the test hard supporters? Well, I think probably that's what we want to do in the future going forward. We're very much focusing our campaign on dropping the test this year, because this year is an exceptional year, but I think that going forward that's what this has to be about. But I don't want to get too bogged down. But I know, Jonathan, you've got some good stuff to say about alternatives and diagnostic assessment and moderated assessment. But is there anything?
That's all going on. I mean, there's this sort of strange kind of belief that SATs is a surprise. When you get the results about your children, you go, "Oh, I never knew that." But actually, they don't give us any other information that we haven't had, ourselves. But as I say, we have a much richer assessment system, which is supporting the child in a whole variety of ways, whether it is sort of just purely academically, but also emotionally, in terms of their attitudes towards learning, their strengths and weaknesses, and identifying gaps. And there's lots of important stuff that's going on continually and rigorously and systematically in schools. It's not just, there's lots of different methods of that we can use. So it's not a difficult thing because we're doing it already. The problem is that has been discounted historically just because of the power of the hammer of the SATs. And it's a very crude, as we've been talking about, a very crude tool. It is ridiculous that we stuck with it, but I think that is because we have been so disempowered over the years. This is a chance for us to come together now as head teachers and say, we want a voice in this. We know what's best for our communities, for our children and things. We're doing so much good work in here, in schools, it's just discounted in terms of assessment. It does exist already, but,
Thank you. I think that, and we've just had a really good comment coming from David Whitehead saying this has to go wider than just SATs. It's the whole accountability system that should be in question, especially, particularly the inspection system. And I think the two have to go together. I always hear this, it's not the testing always that people are worried about, it's the way that they're used in the accountability system. So I think we're really aware of that and we'll build that into the campaign. Now I have to close that, otherwise I can't see the questions. Right. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, just to back up what Jonathan was saying there, and also what Kate was saying earlier about bringing parents in. I think a lot of the parents are under the impression that SATs are how we assess the children. If you listen to government rhetoric, it's kind of we need them to do this so we can see where the gaps are. It's as though we don't assess all the time ourselves anyway. And I think that would really help the parents understand that we do constantly assess, we do give them tests. It's the statutory testing that, and the use of that causes the problem. And they don't help us to assess the children in the slightest. We've got our own methods for doing that, which are much more effective.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think there's a real consensus there, and I think that we'll take all this forward. It's brilliant. There's some brilliant comments coming through the chat as well, which we will record, and this will really inform our campaign and how we go forward and how we work with you and help you work together. So, thank you. I've got another question now from Andy Richbell. How do we get NEHT, my union, on board with this? So Michelle can probably talk to this. The strategy has been engagement, and they feel that Key Stage 1 SATs and moving to EYFS baseline was a win. I don't agree. How can we get them on board? Michelle.
Well, to back up what you were saying earlier, I think our first focus is for next year. I think that if we manage to achieve that, we then need to look for the future. And we're going to be having quite a lot of discussion on that, I think, at the conference. And before, we've got a meeting Wednesday, actually, National Exec. So I think there's more support now from individual NHT members than I've ever known in the past for this change to happen. And all I can say is that we'll all do our best to get them on board. And that's how it becomes NHT policy. So if a motion's presented, it's debated, and then if it goes through, then that becomes policy, and that's how we can do it.
Alison, thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
I was just going to say, I think it is also worth pointing out that Paul Whiteman, the General Secretary of the NEHT, did go on public record last Monday in the TES saying that he felt SATs and statutory testing had no place in this school year. So we know that there's some high-level support for SATs not going ahead this year, because that's a matter in the public domain.
And we've just had in the chat from the Northwest, Jim Nicholson, that it's also being raised in the Northwest. Natalie, did you want to come in? Can she be unmuted? Yeah.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I just wanted to reflect a little back on how important in individual communities I find, I will go to a community up and down the land and people will say, oh, our local head is brilliant, the locals, the teachers are brilliant, they're absolutely wonderful, I entirely trust the school. And you'll even get that sometimes from people who will then go and say, oh, but, we kind of nationally have to have these SATs things, people who've swallowed the ideology. So I think there's something really powerful about trying to take that real trust there is in local communities, the real trust that parents have for their head teacher, for their teachers, and using that and then saying, well, let's look at this at the national level. The profession collectively is all of those people who you all really and value so much. So there's really something very powerful if this argument is coming from that, and making sure, as we're seeing today, where we've got individual people with their individual stories and their individual schools telling that story. I think that's a really powerful way to run the campaign and lead the campaign.
Thank you. And that we do loads of work, grassroots up, trying to build up momentum amongst school leaders, amongst teachers and parents. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to move on. We've got 10 minutes of questions left, 9 in fact. So I'm going to read these two together. I think, well, yes, they're kind of both very COVID related. So Liz Fenlon, already as a school leader, we have 2-year groups isolating, and I doubt that will last. How can any test, including phonics, this term be a priority over our children's mental health? So just not having the kids in school and different numbers of them. And then this one as well, if SATs are to go ahead, which I don't believe they should for all the reasons outlined, is the government going to reduce the content as they have for GCSE? So, there's two things actually. How can it possibly happen? And then what about reducing content? But then which content? So I don't know who wants to speak about that. There's a mental health thing in there as well, Claire. Do you want to speak about that, about mental health and phonics particularly? But
yeah, I mean, I think it speaks for itself that children's minds have to be open enough, be freed up enough from stresses to be able to learn anything, from very small things to very large things. So phonics is actually a very difficult concept to kind of get your head around, isn't it? And if we're really struggling, then how can we possibly expect them? And children are so attuned and hypervigilant of our own expectations, and that again increases their stress. It's a big no. It's a big no. And I think just a small point, but I'd really like to think that in COVID, what it's shown is that our teachers absolutely need to be valued. They have done so much more than their kind of teaching role. They have taken on all aspects of children's well-being, the education. I've seen teachers do the most amazing things to ensure that their children do have the education that they need, but also that their well-being is well cared for. So I would really like to take this opportunity to thank all teachers, but to say, come on people, trust the teachers, trust their assessments. They know best.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Unless anyone's got something burning to say about that, let's get another question. I think we're not campaigning to have the content reduced. It just doesn't work. We're saying they should be dropped this year completely. That's what we're saying at More Than the Score. Shall I go on to the next? We've got a couple more questions. Is there any information that schools, from Sean Cox, is there any information that schools can share with parents regarding the purpose of SATs and how inadequate the assessment process for SATs actually are? If this accurate information is shared with parents, then maybe they would be willing to communicate their concerns with the powers that be. Alison, I think you might be the best person to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, the More Than the Score website is a really rich resource for information that educates parents about exactly what statutory tests are. Many parents we know are unaware that actually statutory tests take place in 4 out of 7 primary school years at the moment. Will be 5 if baseline does come in, although we were delighted at Morden School that we managed to win the dropping baseline for this September's campaign. So yeah, the Morden School website has a lot of information on that. We also, as I said before, are doing an awful lot of awareness building amongst parents. However, you know, it's a golden opportunity with 200 head teachers potentially on this call to say, head teachers, you are listened to by parents, and when you do actually voice your genuine opinions on statutory tests, parents listen and parents take that in. So please, you know, remember Jonathan's suggestion about holding meetings with parents and actually being more open with parents about statutory tests, how they work, and what your views on them are.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're going to take all these questions and all these brilliant comments in the chat that I haven't been able to keep up with. We're going to take all these away, and this will really inform our campaign going forward. I've got a question here from Joe Beaumont. What about those children who, for whatever reason, were not able to access home learning during lockdown? This is a similar question really to the other ones, the ones who are isolating now. And they were not able to study in their homes for whatever reason, being judged alongside those who received a different level of support. And I think that's really important. It's just, there's no level playing field here at all for children. Who would like to speak to that? I think we've covered a lot of that anyway, but Kate? Oh, Claire, go ahead.
You're right, it's so terribly unfair. We know that domestic violence rates have gone through the roof. Drug and alcohol use is greatly increased. Job losses, job insecurity, all of these things are a kind of epidemic in households in themselves, and that permeates into children. So even if they did have the learning there in front of them, they may not be able to access that. And I think it is terribly unfair to put children under an additional pressure to say, well, you need to have done it. You know, and children, as always, have this idea that somebody else is doing much better than them, or they've got, you know, more skills, or this better home life or whatever, and it's just additional stress that they don't need.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go to the last question then, because I think this is a really quite a good one to end on. Jonathan, did you want to just come in there?
Well, just also because we also know that the schools and the children that have suffered most during this pandemic are those children from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. This is doubly difficult for them. I mean, this is just awful, the thought that it's just social injustice that we feel that we should bring in the tests here, which are just going to basically show the gap that we've already got, a massive gap between these children and other children who are lucky enough to get the support at home and things like this. We don't want to be spending time working around tests. We want to be spending time helping these children catch up and giving them the care and the support that they actually need. It's just so important at the moment. We don't want this added distraction.
Claire?
Sorry, and at a time when primary school children's identity is developing, and when you start to widen that gap between what they perceive as their own identity and how other people they perceive as doing better, that's really detrimental to their long-term mental health.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm going to ask this last question, which I think is important. Because I think we do all agree, and it's really about the tone of our campaign. From Ian Hickman, how do we make sure that we don't convey the message that all tests are bad per se? Tests in their various guises do help schools understand how well students are doing. And it's the way these tests are set up and the way that they're used. And I think that's really fundamental to how we go forward with the campaign. I'm really interested if anyone's got anything to say on that. Our final question. Kate?
For me, it's the link between the testing and the school's accountability. If they said to us, here are some stats, if you wish to use them to aid your own teacher assessment, we're not going to want to know the outcome, just use them if you want to. Most of us probably would, but it's the way that you must do it like this, you mustn't open the paper till this particular morning, you mustn't give them any hints, you mustn't help them, it's that whole making it like an exam rather than a test. I don't know any schools that do exams at primary. I know plenty that do tests, and it's that to me is the difference. It's what you do with the results of that test. If it's just for you and your children to move those children forward, that's different to being accountable to the government, the local authority, and the country.
Yeah. Yeah, Natalie.
And I think also, I mean, children are well aware of what the world is actually like in the real world. And they know that, you know, actually their parents, when they're at work, consulting Google all the time. So it turns the test into this special, amazing thing where you just have to remember a whole lot of stuff, which you actually these days don't have to do in practically any other kind of contexts. And so it's this weird artificial thing that they know so much is weighing on. And, you know, they see, you know, they may not have read the whole article in the Times or something, but that whole era about, you know, that whole atmosphere about SATs being really important, this being a really crucial thing. I don't think it's possible, you know, for anyone, teachers or parents, to protect children from that entirely. And the whole idea that this is something where you have to learn to remember lots of stuff and regurgitate it, and nothing else in the world is like that. That makes it a very strange, scary, odd thing. And also, of course, extremely unuseful to prepare people to operate in the world we have today.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's come through very much. It's about trusting teachers to do the assessments that are going to really help the children with their learning and help teachers understand what they need to learn. I think we should finish now, unless anyone's really got anything burning they want to say. Kate's going to speak, and Alison again now. So has any of the other of you got anything really that you would like to say before we do the closing speeches? Right, I'm going to pass you over to Kate then. Kate Owbridge, a head teacher from Kent, one of our core supporters, going to speak.
I'm not going to say very much actually that hasn't already been said, but I'm hoping there's a couple of little phrases that you might want to keep and throw out to anyone that challenges you. My main issue, which those of you who follow me on Twitter will know this, is about talking about who's behind and what behind means, because I don't know who they're behind, because everybody is in the same position. There's a child in our school in year 5 who, when she was in reception in year 1, missed 18 months of school because she had leukemia. You couldn't pick her assessments out of a lineup now. And the rest of her class were all at school while she was poorly at home and in hospital. So to my mind, if she can do that after 18 months out of school and everybody else was in, then everybody else is going to be absolutely fine. For me, it's the purpose behind, as I just said, it's the purpose behind the SATs. And the purpose, as I see, behind certainly Key Stage 2 SATs, is assessing children's attainment and progress over the last 4 years and then producing the data of what that means. So you use those SATs tests, the data from those SATs tests, to measure a school's performance against themselves year on year and against their statistical neighbours. More than ever, it is not a level playing field. It's never been a level playing field, we all know that, but it's even more so not a level playing field. Your statistical neighbour is not going to be your COVID neighbour, because everybody's had a different experience. You've got a different experience from family to family, let alone school to school and area to area. Every child is different. They've all had a different experience, which we've already heard lots about already. They're going to be in and out of school, as we've already seen, in 2 weeks, in and out of school as individuals, in and out of school as families, in and out of schools as year groups or classes. They'll have a different experience of lockdown, different experience when they're at home, and all of that goes into the mix. And then, of course, each school is different to the next school. We're very lucky in Crowborough, where I am at the moment. We've not had a positive case in a school yet, but it's only a matter of time. So the schools who you used to compare yourselves with to say, well, how are we doing against these? They've got the same number of people premium as us. How are we doing? There's going to be no data on whether they had loads of COVID and you didn't, or whatever. It's the whole thing is just shot. The data is worth nothing. So if the data is useless, and we're not going to know anything, we're not going to use it ourselves for any great use. The government, DfE, and nobody else is going to be able to make any use of that data whatsoever. Why would you collect it? And if you're collecting it from the SATs, then why are you doing the SATs? That's my issue with the whole thing. So I would say we let leaders and let teachers and school leaders decide where children are, how best to assess them, how best to report that, and how best to move children on in all areas of their development, not just maths, reading and writing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kate. And then, so I'm going to pass this over now to Alison Ali, who works with me on More Than a Score, who's going to talk to you now about strategy and next steps.
Hi everybody. Well, can I first of all just say heartfelt thanks to all our wonderful speakers today. And heartfelt thanks to our equally wonderful attendees. You've been brilliant, really dynamic in terms of asking questions, and all the comments we have been noting. So if we didn't quite get round to your specific point, don't worry, it's all grist for the mill as far as we're concerned. I think we can all agree that the single most dominant theme to come out here today is that this year these tests are wholly ineffective, useless from a data point of view, and morally wrong, because it's the last thing children need. They need a real focus on learning and not on statutory testing. And I do just want to pick up on that point made about testing and very much reassure everybody on this call that More Than a Score is not against testing. We know that it is a very useful tool for schools, for teachers, for parents and for children. It's the statutory test that we take issue with. So you've helped make this webinar a really brilliant public expression of all the behind the scenes conversations that we at More Than a Score have with school leaders, with the NHT and with the NEU, with the Worthless group of heads. It's a real shame that you couldn't hear Brian Walton, but hopefully we'll be having more of these events, and you will get to hear Brian, who was here representing the Worthless group of heads. We have those conversations obviously with parents and parent organisations and with Parliament. I want to share with you just a very quick overview of our strategy to win. Our objective is to stop all statutory testing in 2020-21, starting with the phonics check this term. Now, because of the very short time frame there, realistically, the chances are phonics will go ahead, but that mustn't stop us speaking out against it. And it does provide a good opportunity to continue building support for dropping SATs in 2021, because we can really, if phonics is forced through and the government don't drop that, then we can use it as a recruiting ground to really get everybody's mind focused on stopping yet more of these tests coming through in 2021. So as Michelle's speech and as the statement in tests that Paul Whiteman showed, we feel that the NAHT want these tests dropped, and that's going to be, I think that picture will become clearer over the next few weeks. You know, all evidence points to the fact that the government decision on SATs in 2021 may well come at the 11th hour, and that makes it even more vital that we run a vigorous campaign throughout the school year. Policymakers must be left in absolutely no doubt as to where school leaders stand on this. So how do we do that? We do that by bringing school leaders, governors and trustees, teachers, parents, unions and parliamentarians together to exert as much pressure as possible on the DfE. We will help all these groups come together to say the same thing to the right people at the right time. We know how influential school leaders can be, and I'm sure you know that too, in your communities, with your parent bodies, with your local MPs and councillors, and in Westminster as a whole, therefore. And we know that as a result of COVID, to pick up on what an attendee said, heads and teachers are trusted more than ever, and certainly probably more than the government at this point, and we have to build on that. So if this event has got you fired up, and we're really hoping it has, it's certainly got us fired up, then here are the immediate next steps on how you can help the campaign. The single most effective thing you can do right now is to speak out and garner support locally. And we want to make this easy for you. So number one, together with a group of heads, we've created a brief, powerful statement calling for the government to drop statutory tests in 2021. This is something that you can use, and you can share it with your governors or trustees in the first instance, with your local or national school leaders networks, and with your local media. You can also share it with parents. And because we know head teachers want to make sure they have the backing of parents when they speak out, with head teachers' help, we've put together a parent survey. And this is something you can share with your parents alongside the head statement. Number two, spread the word about our Drop SATs 2021 petition, which has already had well over 40,000 signatures. And number three, if you're active on social media, then please make sure you're following More Than a Score and share our posts. We know lots of you are doing that already. If more of you can come on and do that, brilliant. So we'll be following up in the next 24 hours or so with an email that includes all the info that you need to move forward on these 3 steps. And in the coming weeks, we'll be in touch regarding a focused parliamentary campaign to include a primary school leaders letter to Gavin Williamson and an MP letter writing campaign that will bring together school leaders, parents and teachers. So we've got real momentum now. School leaders, teachers, parents, unions and academics are coming together to say, make our children more than a score. DropSats 2021 is an eminently winnable campaign. So let's just win it. Thank you.
Fantastic. And it's exactly 6 o'clock. We've finished on time. Thank you so much to everybody for coming. I do this kind of school leader engagement for More Than a Score, and I'll be emailing you in the next 24 to 48 hours with all those next steps, with all that stuff that Alison's just talked about, so that you know you've got the links and everything. And yeah, just let's keep working together. Thank you.